it's such an industry where it's really hard to be very type A and want an answer. And there usually is no answer, but like you said, luck, timing, the moon rising on the right way.
You're listening to Writer Unblocked, the podcast for serious authors who are ready to scale their careers with smart strategy. I'm Nicole, your host, and I help authors navigate publishing, marketing, and multi-format expansion, all while keeping the vibe high. Welcome back to Writer Unblocked. Today, I'm joined by Linda Camacho, a senior literary agent with 20 years in the publishing industry and a champion for emerging voices. We talk about what agents actually do, how to protect your rights, what dying on submission really means, and why self-publishing isn't a backup plan, it's a business. Additional information is available in the show notes, or as always, you can visit writerunblockedpodcast.com. Let's get into it. To start, I first want to thank you again for being here, Linda, on Writer Unblocked. And why don't you give us a mini introduction about who you are and what you do for our listeners?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I am a senior literary agent at Galton Zacher Literary Agency. So I've been in publishing this year, actually, 20 years, which is so wild. Like to start counting when you start counting in decades, it's like, oof. So I am agenting 10 of those years. So I used to work on the other side at Penguin and even Random House before they merged. And then I moved over to agenting in 2015. And I've been doing that. And I get to represent a lot of wonderful artists, both in the illustration world and, of course, writers, mostly the children's side, but I also delve into the adult side. So it keeps me having a lot of fun when I need a palate cleanser.
I love that. And I love that it's both illustrators and writers, which we can get into a little bit about how that works. But I have saved this question for you since October, because in October, I saw that you were open for submissions. You were only open for like 2 weeks, I believe, and you received over 1,200 submissions. I'm not an agent. I need to know how, walk me through this. Like how, okay, so then you close for submissions. How do you go through a pile of submissions as an agent?
You know, I will not pretend that I'm good at it. I am terrible at it. And actually, I'm still getting back to people and saying, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. It's tough. It really is. I don't have an assistant. I think it helps if I had an assistant, I have to pay out of pocket. That's kind of the way it works in publishing, at least in agenting side, because we're contract workers in terms of pay. So we get paid on commission for the most part. So when it's just one person, there are people I'm sure who do a way better job and they actually structure their time. Ideally, when I am doing it well, I'm doing a little bit every day, but that's just so hard to get to. And I think people don't realize, since we have our clients who are keeping us so busy, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because I'm so glad. And then the thing is, right, it'd be nice to sometimes look for new people, but our duty is to our clients first and foremost. So that's why it takes forever to get back to it. But yeah, 1,200, I would say it's not super unusual. That happens to a lot of colleagues of mine across the board, just because people know who we are. And then when we finally open, it just, the deluge comes. Sometimes it's people that just see it's an agent and they have no idea what we even represent. And they just go, oh, I just want, like, so some of that is just, stuff that isn't appropriate or good for what we actually do. But yeah, there's so many amazing writers, illustrators that I wish I could just say yes to everyone. But I'm bad. I'm bad at keeping up.
I know the feeling of wanting to say yes to everybody, because we want everybody's story to be out there. Like it's so personal for you and for me and what we do. Like we want to help people get their stories out there however we can. And which brings me to the question of like how do you evaluate a manuscript, especially in the more crowded genres? Like how do you say this is good one?
Yeah. And every answer in publishing is it depends, right? So a lot of it is really driven by my taste. And of course, keeping an eye on the market where I see, keep an eye on the deals, reading Publishers Weekly, reading the trades, all of that, where you get to see what deals are announced. You get to see the genres, people who sold it, people who acquired it. but a lot of it is really super taste driven, which is what makes it kind of wonderful and terrible. Where like if I put out in the world, and I've done this where I'm like, oh, I am in the mood for a young adult Western for some reason. I just woke up today. And then someone might actually be going, I sent you one. And I feel so bad because it's not even that, you know, their work is bad by any stretch or they're not publishable and that they're terrible. None of that. It's just, what is it that resonates with me in some way, right? It's like you can read a best selling book, right? The New York Times, and it makes so much money. And then you might go, oh, what, why does anybody like this, right?
Okay.
It's so subjective. It's so subjective.
Can, this happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Something wins audiobook of the year or a book is
Yeah.
on the New York Times bestsellers and I finally pick it up because I want to be part of the hype and I read it and I'm like, ugh, it's not for me. So I do remind authors of that, like even the best of bestest sellers are not for everybody. So there's an element of skill, but also luck and timing in terms of securing an agent and then getting that book to be picked up by a publisher because we are human beings, so it is subjective to people's tastes.
I've definitely passed on many things that have gone on to do like really, really well, bestsellers. And even then, especially in the beginning, I used to beat myself up about that and go, oh my gosh, I'm wrong. But it really isn't a question of being wrong. It's just, it's not, it's not for me. And even if I had the next Hunger Games or whatever the next, thing is, would I have been the right person to shepherd that into the world? Would I have even submitted it to the same editors? All of those things go into play. And sure, maybe some of them I would have done a great job with it, right? Even the things I've lost out on where I go, oh my gosh, like it makes me sad. But it really has to be with the right person at the right time. And it's not necessarily something you can replicate, right? The way even someone who has a path as a writer in publishing, where you look at your friend who maybe is doing better than you. You
Right.
can't, there's no one right way to do it, which again, it's such an industry where it's really hard to be very type A and want an answer. And there usually is no answer, but like you said, luck, timing, the moon rising on the right way. Whenever I get an offer from an editor, I always feel like it really feels like the stars aligned.
So I'm curious about that process. So you select something that has been submitted to you, and then your next step is to reach out to an editor.
Right. So whenever, I guess if we start with the querying stage, which is that very initial cover letter stage where they're like, Linda, hey, look at me. Um, and then if I read it and then love it, um, then I fall in love and then I do the pick me. I'm like, please pick me, right? And then if I'm lucky that the client, potential client agrees to it, then part of the conversation is editorial notes, right? That's a usually big part of it, which happens before anyone accepts an offer of representation because what my vision is might not align, right? So if you're talking to someone, even if they're a top-notch agent, again, they can be a great agent, but they might not be the right agent for you and for what your vision of the work is. But let's say they do align, then we work on it. And again, the timing can vary. I once had a person where we worked on it for like 2 years, right? That happens. It's not all the time, but it happens. Or just, sometimes a few months. And then eventually I put together a list of editors because I know who's buying what. I tend to, have the contacts. We have a lot of, networking events, a lot of chats. I'll put that list together and then submit it to them with a pitch. And then hopefully they read and love it. And that can take time. The people will say, how long does it take to sell a book? Haha. um, I've had a book again that took 7 years just because that was the
7 years?
extreme end of it. It just came out this month. But yes, it was 10 years into our um, collaboration. And sometimes you push that long for a particular book. It took many iterations of that book, not the norm, but it could, I mean, it's not impossible. And then the quickest turnaround was the same day. So I've had an offer from day one and 7 years. So between one day and 7 years
That's the answer.
can
Between
be
it
the
takes
answer for that. And then, yeah, then you hope you get an offer. And then when you get an offer, or if it's multiple offers, you go back to the client and you say, hey, Like, look at these people. They're all interested. Let's have conversations. And it's kind of like the conversation they had with me, right? Am I the right person? Does the offer look fair? And I talk them through it, and the client decides in the end. I can never decide for the client, but I can always advise and say, yeah, I think this is fair,
Right.
you know, or I think this is terrible. But in the end, even if I thought it was a horrible offer, which is pretty rare, but if I thought it wasn't the best offer, they have the final say in that.
Right. And in this case, when you're an agent, you know what, because you've done other deals, standard offers. You have a sense of what is a quote unquote good deal and what isn't. And you can advise your client. I want to talk to you about subsidiary rights. So you can quickly explain what are those. And my gosh, the reason I'm asking this is because I'm working with a client now, and she didn't have an agent. She signed with a small publisher, and she signed away all her rights. And now we're trying to claw back her audio rights because she didn't really. Anyway,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So when the book is the thing, right? Whenever anyone queries me, when they reach out to me, the book is the thing. Sometimes people will say, hey, is this going to be a movie? And I'll go, that would be amazing, but let's not worry about that now. The book. So that's the primary main right. So ideally, we sell that, technically license it to a publisher. And there's so many associated rights that are derived from that. So if you're thinking of um, foreign rights, right? If you want your book published in Spain or you want it even in England, those are other territories. So foreign translation rights, that's one of those derivative, AKA subsidiary rights. You have audio rights. You have even book clubs and fairs, like any other version of your book that can be made into the world. That's what that is, right? So just all of those little things. And so basically, when you are working with a representative like an agent, then we try to retain those rights, right? Because ideally, we can exploit those rights for you, we can sell those rights for you, and you tend to make more money. And primarily, you have control of that. When you let go of those rights, there are ways of getting them back if you have reversion. I don't want to get too much into it, but once you let go of a right, it's basically lost forever. And that's the hard news to swallow. I've definitely had clients who have gone into projects unrepresented and they didn't understand how rights work. And then they let go of all their rights. Even when the publisher, and again, this is not every publisher, like every publisher definitely tries to grid everything. That's the game. And then my goal is to say, no, no, no. And then we try to work out the deal. Sometimes they'll say, and I'm making up a number, like $10,000, we want all the rights. And I'm like, well, that's not enough money. So no. And then they try to give you a certain amount of money. In some cases, they can give you enough money that it makes sense for them to have certain rights, but most times that's pretty rare, truly. But yeah, subsidiary rights are so critical that if you can retain them so you can control them, even if you're not with an agent, the only thing is you need to know somebody or who knows how to handle those rights for you if you
right,
don't know how to do it yourself.
right. So I've also encountered where one set of rights, say print or audio, the publisher is asking for exclusivity, meaning now I can't exploit the print rights for X amount of time because the audio needs to be exclusive for 3 months. Or it could happen. I mean, it would probably be unlikely, but it could happen the other way around. So there's also people need to pay attention to. You need to pay attention to what you're signing. You
Absolutely.
need to pay attention
Absolutely.
to what you're signing.
Yeah.
But I think the takeaway here is your one book has a multitude of rights attached to it: audio, print, ebook, foreign language, territory. That's the other one, right? Because I have acquired things at my job where we can only distribute it in the US and Canada, and some other publisher is acquiring the right to do it in, the UK and New Zealand and Australia. Commonwealth minus Canada.
Right.
You learn
It's so specific, all of the language. Yes.
you
Very
learn so
specific.
much reading these contracts.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I always tell people, even if you don't want an agent, and that's fair. I think, some people I would I mean, I'm biased. I think everyone could use an agent, but I understand it's not for everybody. Some people know they want full control. And I think for people like that, it makes perfect sense. But just make sure that you, A, either get really good at contracts and understand what you're signing, or B, at least hire somebody who does know. You can always hire an attorney to look it over. You have other resources like the Authors Guild. They have people who can review for it. So as long as you don't go in blind,
Right.
protect yourself.
Right. And a lot of what I see in the last couple of years, especially with the explosion of self-publishing and it being very lucrative for some authors, I have seen where, they self-publish and then agents and publishers pick them up. So being a self-published author to begin with does not hurt you necessarily as it would have in the past. I talk to authors who are very, oh no, I can't self-publish it. And I said, well, you can. You can. There are instances where your next work could be picked up by an agent, and now you actually have data about how you perform in the market
Right.
to add to your query letter as well.
Yeah, self-publishing is such a great option for people. And again, it always depends, right, on what your goals are. Like if you know that you always wanted to be traditionally published and you haven't tried traditional publishing, I would say start there if you know that's what you want. But, and I think people have to understand that self-publishing is such a business, right? Like anything, traditional publishing is a business, but it drives me nuts when someone goes, I'm just going to throw my book up there and see how it does. That's not, unless you just don't care, because there are some people who don't. They do just want it to be up there and show the world. That's okay, right? And they're usually a one and done. Totally fine. But if you know that you want a career, you really need to evaluate the market, like what I do, right? You evaluate what's selling. There are certain genres, certain categories that do better in self publishing. How do you market? How do you do it correctly? If you're a one-stop shop, you have to do everything. There's some people who do it beautifully, but the ones who don't go into it with knowledge will usually mess themselves up. But self-publishing can be such a great option. But I definitely get a lot of people who go, again, they'll say, hey, I sold 30 books. I'm like, well, why are you querying me with this book? That's the thing, right? Because if you knew you wanted to be self-published, which is totally fine, don't self-publish. So yes, you can get an agent's attention, and you're right, absolutely right. But the numbers have to be so incredibly massive. And I don't even have a number, thousands of pound thousands, right? Like so many thousands. But sometimes they'll say, oh, look, I sold like even 10,000. And so that's just not enough most times. So if you're only doing it to get an agent, just, buyer beware, right? But it doesn't mean you can't. Just understand what you're getting into and the particular market.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
And I think also, like, if you're selling 10,000 copies self-published, that's actually really lucrative for you, and you wouldn't
Yeah.
want to cut someone else
That's
into that.
That's the
So,
thing too, right? There's some people who self-publish, you know, even fewer than that, who can make really decent money, like more money, because right, if you publish with a publisher, there are definitely great benefits to it, but you don't have the same level of control, obviously. You don't have the same cut, right? Because it's a much lower percentage. So you really want to evaluate that. But yeah, if you're selling a ton of copies, like sometimes there are people that they get reached out to who are like massively successful who don't want a traditional deal. And that's fair. If they know they want to do it themselves and they can make bank, why not? Right? Like,
yeah.
not a bad idea.
Ooh, speaking of money. Okay. So you are on your way to being a certified financial coach, which is such a boon to have an agent who is also a certified financial coach. Because let's talk about money. Let's talk about, why is this important? How does it, how do you see the difference between, again, if you're going to do the self-publishing route versus the traditional route, and just budgeting and money for authors and creatives and illustrators? What got you into this path? And talk to me about how does one get certified to be a
Oh, yeah.
financial coach?
Yes. Well, I signed up for the CFEI, which is Certified Financial Instruction, right? So certified financial education instruction. So you have to study so many hours and you have to take a test. So I'm going to be taking that soon in the next month or two. And, looking at all the things you basically need to know, right? Because I am a lot. self-taught. And there are money coaches who are self-taught, and I think they're great, but there are a lot who aren't and probably should not be giving advice. So it's a mixed bag. So I really like a certification because luckily I'm able to pay for it. And I just think I want at least a bare level knowledge. A lot of it, yes, I know, but again, one doesn't know everything. So it's nice to go in prepared so that I don't steer anyone wrong. It's similar to agenting, right? Technically, anybody can be a literary agent. You can wake up, Nicole, tomorrow and go, I just want to hang my shingle. And someone like you has more experience, so I'm not worried about you. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who get into certain things with enthusiasm and love, genuine love, but without background can do damage. So, again, that's why I think with the certification, that's the route I chose. But in terms of how I started to get there, I have clients, and it's not just clients. I've just seen over the 20 years that I've been working in this industry, so many creatives who don't know how to manage their money, right? And I think that's pretty much anyone. But when you're thinking of creatives like writers and illustrators, it's feast or famine, right? Like you get a check, even if it's a massive check, and we can always explain how money works in publishing because it's even if someone says I got a six-figure deal, they're not just rolling in money. It takes time to get that money, taxes, agent cut. Like there's so many pieces to it. So you might have a client who said, "Wow, I had like a massive deal. Where did the money go?" And now I'm struggling to, meet a deadline, but I also have to work this job, right? Or you have this dream of being a full-time writer or illustrator, and that can mean different things for people. And it's just really hard to be creative when you're worried about where am I going to live? Am I going to be on the street? Right. And understandably so. Like, how can I ask a client to deliver a manuscript when they don't know if they have a house to live in, in a week or something? So, and now it's tax season. And also I'm seeing clients go, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if I have money to pay taxes. And again, that happens to everybody. But with creatives, I figure if they can have some sort of instruction, like, okay, say it can, again, there's no such thing as common sense because we don't know what we don't know. And it took
Okay.
me years to learn this too, because I get paid in a similar way to what creatives get. So sadly, I'm not rolling in money, but I understand because even when I left a Random House to move into, which was a full-time job, it didn't pay me a ton, but it was a W-2 salary. I moved to agenting 10 years ago and became a 1099 contractor. And I remember going, how? How do you do this? Right. Thankfully, someone helped get me a job in a restaurant. So literally, I've just taken jobs on the side to be able to fund this dream of one day being a full time agent. And now I am, but I still do a lot of freelance because you got to keep money flowing in. So we're in the same boat, but I actually learned how to manage my money. So if I can help in some way, my clients and especially people who out there in the world, I think you can be creative. You can do this thing that you really want to do and not struggle.
That is so true. There's such a link between creativity and financial stress that I
Oh yeah.
hadn't thought about it until you just said that because how can you work on a manuscript when you don't know if you can
Yeah.
pay that tax bill that you're right, it's 4 or 5 days away from the deadline. It's April 10th today.
Yeah,
Um,
everyone's in a tizzy now. I'm feeling it. Like, yeah,
ay, ay,
it's
ay.
stressful. It's scary. And it's always interesting to, like, even when I've been giving more sessions through like other places, like how to read a royalty statement and just like all of these little things that, and look, I'm still learning half the time. I have colleagues who are brilliant at royalty statements, but there's no standardizations. There, it's even when I got a sales report for something else the other day, I was asking my colleague, like, does this make sense? She's like, nope, it doesn't make any sense. It's not your fault. It's just incomprehensible sometimes. And we have to ask questions. So don't feel bad that you, the creator, the creative, doesn't know. Um, we're figuring it out too. And it's hard. It's really tough.
And I love that you said about the whole, like, you get a six-figure advance. You don't get a six-figure advance.
If
And first
only.
of all, the way I've seen these structured is you get X percent when you sign, you then get this much when you deliver the first draft. Like you said, your agent gets a cut. So it's not that you sign a deal and tomorrow you have all this
Right.
thousands of dollars in your bank account. But the other thing you mentioned too that I wanted to get back to is an agent doesn't just sell your book and then they're done with the work. Like you are receiving royalty statements and combing through paperwork on behalf of your clients. Your work continues as long as that book
Right.
is out there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I always tell people when you're looking for an agent, remember the agent only gets paid when the client gets paid, never the other way around. So that's how you know if someone's legitimate. If I'm saying, hey, I'll read your thing. Like again, for conferences, sometimes they'll give us some money to just read it, but I never tie that to representation. Like, oh, only if you pay me, I will represent you.
Right.
No.
There is no paying an agent upfront. That
No,
is a scam.
no. Outside of a conference, that's a very separate thing. If you're just reaching out to me, Linda, look, check this out, and I start charging you, no, that is not legitimate. So, yeah, anytime you get paid, I get paid, right? So there's a lot of free labor, just like the creative, a lot of free labor on their end. So, yeah, like of course, people think of us for negotiating, contracts, but that really is the start of it. And technically, look, anybody can technically sell a book because someone can say, hey, I sold a book to an editor. Like, I don't need an agent. I'm like, well, I'm glad you did. You might need an agent. I don't know because there's so much after. So yeah, whether it's royalty statements, even managing the process, right? From the time you sign with an editor, just making sure that communication remains smooth because sometimes communication can break down. And it doesn't mean that it's anyone's fault even, right? They're no necessarily bad actors. It's just trying to understand what one person's saying. Like the editor might say something and the client, again, especially if they're newer, might not understand certain things. So I'm an interpreter of sorts. I try and then sometimes the editor doesn't understand a thing and I'll interpret for them. So I try to make sure everyone, especially my client, is happy in the process and that the book gets done. But also, yeah, I'm a chaser of payments, you know, um, because primarily I am a career manager, right? We think about, okay, I help advise the client on when the next potential book could be and where do you want to go in 5 years, 10 years, like all of the long term stuff. But primarily, I have a fiduciary responsibility to my client. So I have
Okay.
to make sure they get paid, they get compensated fairly, ideally they get paid on time, all of that goes with it. And it's such a long tail end. So yeah, it's a long relationship when it works. And it really is a beautiful one. It is such an intimate relationship because you see each other through the highs and lows. Yeah.
Yeah, no, people have been with their agents the whole time, the whole entire time, forever and ever. That's my agent. I want to talk about a term that I see a lot on social media for those of people listening who don't know what it means, but you'll see a lot of social media posts on Instagram with an author crying or what have you, or sad, saying it died on submission. Can you explain what that dying on submission means?
Oh, that is so heartbreaking. Yeah. So again, right? You have an agent. Yay, all set, done. No, that's the goalpost keeps moving, right? Whenever we talk about success, where you think, great, if only I can finish a manuscript, great, if only I can land an agent. But again, when you land an agent, your chances are higher, obviously, of selling a book, especially to a place where they don't accept unagented submissions. But we don't sadly sell every book. Like I wish we did sell every book. So dying on sub means we put your book on submission, as in we send it to editors in different rounds. We keep trying for as long as possible. And depending on the kind of book that it is, sometimes there are many editors we can submit to. Sometimes there are only a few editors. It really does depend. But after a point when we've exhausted all our options, there comes the conversation where it's like, I'm really sorry. We couldn't sell it. What can we do next? And that's heartbreaking because you put in so much time, so much effort, but sometimes a book doesn't sell. There are cases, again, I never like to guarantee anything because publishing is what it is, that you can, maybe it just wasn't the right time for the book. Like I had a client that I signed with 10 years ago for her first book that I really, really loved. It was about a Latina Irish dancer, middle grade, super cute. She suffers from anxiety. It was just such a cute story. And it didn't sell. It just didn't, and it wasn't the right time for it, whatever it was. And then we pulled it out again a year ago. We've been together 10 years. It's just like, how about we try again? I'm like, you know what? And again, we don't do this for every book. It just made sense for this book and where her career was because she was doing so well. Her name is Shamila Saad Mendez. And it came out this year. Like it wound up being sold and it's called The Real Wish. And it came out like it's about to come out or like within the next couple months. Yeah. So
That's great.
like it
And yes,
happens
it's not
sometimes.
everybody's story, but
Right. It can happen. Right. And sometimes it will sit in the drawer forever, never to be a published book. But I always say it is so heartbreaking. However, it wasn't a waste of time because you have learned about yourself in the process. And ideally, the next book is better because that's the process for anybody. So it's hard. And, only in hindsight can we say that. And I never talk about it in the middle of it. You only can see it moving forward, but it was not a waste of time. It doesn't make it less heartbreaking, but it happens to the best of us.
yeah, you're right. And there's a statistic, I don't know it off the top of my head, but there are authors who it was their second or third book that
Oh, yeah,
hit, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think I had one where it was like the fifth book. It happens. It does.
It's interesting though because there's such an emotional connection between the author and their first manuscript that I try as I might to set expectations. Like there's just such an emotional hold on the first one, and that's the one, and you're like, okay, it could be, but maybe
Right.
not, and maybe it'll
Yeah.
be you learn, like you said, you learn from this process from a writing perspective, from a process perspective, and then it's your second or third book that makes it and gets published and
Yeah.
sells really well.
Yeah. Because sometimes you do look at that first book later, years later, and you're like, oh, yeah, no, that was not ready. Sometimes that happens too. That
Yeah.
happens. That does.
Now I want to talk about publishing, like the industry, because in many ways it stays exactly the same, but in many ways it changes, right? And I was wondering if you had any insights about how how do you see it changing, or what should we keep in mind now? And it could be from a technology standpoint, AI, the rapid pace of audio. Like what's happening?
Right. Yeah.
That's the question,
No, no,
Linda.
that
What's
what's
happening?
happening? As you know, right? Yes, things are always changing. And people have always said, oh, books, oh, people read books sometimes when they find out I'm a poster. Yeah, they do. Especially when I think of the pandemic. Like that was such a critical time that reminded us how much entertainment media was critical. I mean, above anyone else, Nicole, audiobooks skyrocketed during the like they were growing, but then whoosh during the pandemic, like it's wild. And it's still growing every year. It's still like audiobooks, even print books, like it's all growing. And what I love is that there are different iterations of reading, whether you're reading digitally, whether you're reading in print. And no, when people say, oh, but with ebooks, look, even when ebooks came out, and they've been around for a long time, but when I was at Random House, I was there from like 2010 to 2015. And ebooks were becoming even more of a thing, and they
Oh,
were
it was a whole
figuring out. Remember,
kerfuffle. Yeah, it
remember
was
with the agency pricing, just the pricing, and they were trying to figure out because everyone got scared. They're like, "Oh gosh, what's going to happen to the print book?" But look, they have found people who love digital also like to have their copies, like their hard copies in hand. So even if there are fewer print, it does not fully replace. And again, print is still growing in its other ways too.
and these
So
covers are so beautiful, Linda. We're going to
yeah,
talk about
it's
illustrators
like
in
a
a moment, but
collector's item. So things are still growing. And then in terms of the market, I'm not going to pretend it's easy. In ways we've grown, wonderful, love it. There are ways in which we've shrunk, sadly, and that's because of the mergers. Again, every industry, right? Think of banking. My mother used to work in banking, and they used to tell her even 30, 40 years ago, like one day, because they had they had all these mom and pop shops. One day there will only be a handful of banks. And of course, that's what's happened. So that's similar to publishing. We used to have tons and tons of publishers, and it's just shrunk, right? We have the big five,
I remember when
which
they were the big six.
used to be the big six, right? Penguin Random House came together, and that was, in my opinion, terrifying. And then you have, now with Simon and Schuster, which that whole kerfuffle where, they were almost bought by Penguin Random House, but now they're bought by a private equity firm, which has other implications. Imprints are closing right? So there's a lot of consolidation. A lot of people are being laid off, again, across pretty much every industry. But in publishing, a lot of the relationships that I've cultivated over the years have vanished, which is kind of sad that it makes it harder for newer agents to get a foothold. So it can be really hard. And right, there are a lot of there are a lot of agents that have come in, which great. I love that. But it can be hard because there's so many. It's that it, it's the blessing and the curse thing where there is more access in terms of gatekeepers, but the downside is there are fewer editors, there are fewer imprints, at least in traditional publishing. So if you're trying to do that, it's just much more competition. And that if you're trying to get the attention in traditional publishing, you really have to shine. And what does that even mean? Because it's subjective. We don't know what that means. So that can make it harder. But there are avenues. You do have self-publishing. I've been seeing more of the rise in hybrid publishing. So it's not doom and gloom. It's just knowing what's the best course for you. There are avenues for creatives, which I love, but just being aware of what does each avenue mean for you. So yeah, I do teach a course on agenting, and I do find sometimes it can be a Debbie Downer when like I'm trying not to scare people. I'm trying not to scare people because sometimes when I talk about how agents get paid or how creatives get paid, or even a regular person, as in like a lay person who doesn't know anything about publishing, right? They hear you're an author and they're like, oh my gosh, you must have money. Just all of those perceptions about publishing or that even agents have money. Like there are some, right? Like with authors that make bank, there's some agents that make bank and I do pretty well, but I am not, that level of like, I'm just sitting counting my dollars here. But there's so many levels. It is very competitive. So I would just say, the good thing is there's a lot of resource out there. There are a lot of stuff out there. More, maybe too much. That's what can be hard about it. There is a wealth of information at your disposal, but how do you know to whom to go? I guess can be the
I was
issue.
gonna say, even in the self-publishing, right, route, it's like
Yeah.
there's so many options,
Yeah.
and how do you do
Yeah.
it, and where do you start? But
Yeah.
I
And
do
book
I do
banning is
agree
a
with
thing, but that could be a whole other topic of conversation. With book banning and this administration, it's just gotten worse and worse. And
it. It's so
banning
hard
is terrible.
to
It's
navigate.
yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about book talk, and now that you even bring
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
the
book talk.
administration, it's like
Yeah.
I knew a lot of authors like, "Okay, I gotta get on book talk," and then I got banned for 5 minutes, and then people, even after I came back, just I stopped using it because I'm like, "I'm not gonna put my time and effort into something that could potentially be banned again." I just don't like, I have enough with my Instagram, like, it's hard enough. And so it sometimes sucks to say it, but it's not, being an author is not just writing, which is, like, the part that you wanna do. It's like there's
Oh yeah.
so much more. You gotta research, you gotta understand how people are promoting things, you have to understand how querying works if you're gonna go that route. You have to understand self-publishing, you have to understand cover art, you have to understand marketing, social
Yeah, it's a
media.
lot.
I
It is
Most
a
of the
lot.
authors that I know who are successful have an assistant. Like, I don't even know how you would do it as an author without
Yeah.
an assistant, especially for the social media part. Newsletters, like, authors have to have newsletters, and how many subscribers do you have in your newsletter, and how's your reach? Um, so it is, you said the B word earlier, it is a business.
It really is.
It is a business, so you have to have your financial head together, you have to have your creative part is, like, just the beginning,
Right. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you have to have all these other ducks in a row, yeah, so
It's
a lot of
it's tough.
preparation.
Yeah, it's tough. And again, right? It's not to, and we're not. I know we're not. I know we might be scaring some people, but it's not to scare you. It's to prepare you, right? Because there are some people who will go into it thinking it's going to be, oh, if I publish a book, my life will be better, right? And I'm not saying that your financial circumstances might not be changed, right? There are people who publish books and make a ton of money. I mean, not out of the blue. I mean, if that happens, that's amazing. I want to play the lotto. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of really persistence because there's so many people being published. And again, it's subjective. But I'm like, how did they get a book deal? Like, but again, it's subjective. My taste is not everyone's taste. That's the great part about it. So that should inspire you to keep going because truly, if you can stick it out chances are you're going to do something, even if it's not in the traditional space. It's somewhere, you need that outlet. But yeah, don't go into it thinking my life will be all roses. If I Even when you publish a book, there are other things that come into play that make it really tough, because that's why so many people disappear. Like in terms of people who don't last, even someone who was doing really well, even a New York Times bestseller, because the emotional burden can be a lot. Sometimes, if you're isolated, I would say please find your community, because that's going to bolster you. So if you're scared, just make sure, be creative, do the thing, find your community, because that will help sustain you.
That is such sorry. That is such good advice because the community is so wonderful, the author community, and you could have levels of community. You could have on a local level, your local library, your local Facebook groups, but then also there's just this whole online community of authors who I see support each other, forums, Facebook groups. It's wonderful. And even when I used to go, I don't do it as often, but when I used to go to those author conferences and romance conferences, and I used to do a lot of that, but pre-pandemic, they were just so lovely. The group of authors that would just get together, and yeah, you're right, Linda. Like community in this space is so important because it is a very hard journey, no matter what path you're gonna take. And as a coach, I see a lot of demoralized authors, and it's a wave. Like one day they could be really happy and we're like, yeah, we're doing this, and like, what do you need from me, and like everything's great, and they're so excited, and we hang up and everything's great, and then we have a call the next week and everything is just awful again. And so it is a very emotional journey because you're putting yourself in the most vulnerable position and up and like exposing yourself to rejection. And pre-publishing, you're exposing yourself to rejection, and then once you publish, now you have to deal with reviews and that kind of rejection. And so it's thick skin, easier said than done, but it's a hard it could be a hard world out there,
Oh yeah,
especially for
yeah.
creatives. Yes.
So true.
But speaking of, talk to me about illustrators. So you represent
I do.
illustrators as well,
I do.
for specifically for books.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, I represent illustrators. They do a variety of things. So I initially got into I was afraid of illustrators. When I started in agenting land, I told myself I was not going to do anything with picture books or anything like that, just because it's not easy to do. And I think so many people think, I'm going to write a picture book. It's so easy. And it's the exact opposite. I have an MFA from a children's writing program, and I learned how to do it just because I wanted to learn, and I cannot write a picture book. I can evaluate one, but never. So I was afraid, I didn't know how to do it. But eventually I did take someone on, and I had mentors who helped me do it, and I loved it. So actually, most of my list, I would say at least half, are illustrators. So they do things like graphic novels, they do picture books, they do illustrations in terms of the book cover. Sometimes they do book covers. You have those books like chapter books where they have like little art in there scattered through, spot art. They do stuff like that. So I have some illustrators who make, really stable, decent money doing book covers, spot art, even if they haven't done their own work. So yeah.
That is interesting. I was talking to an illustrator the other day, and then I was talking to a client of mine the other day, and she's like, I'm looking for someone to draw character art because there's this whole trend now, and it like, what do you post as an author aside from quotes from your book? And it's
Right.
like people love seeing character art. Like, what do your characters look like? Or here's the scene from chapter or whatever.
Right.
And so I see more and more illustrators offering character art services. So,
That's great.
you could design the cover, you can design, like you said, the art that's in the chapters, but sometimes for promotional purposes and to get your fan base fired up,
Yeah.
illustrators are being sought after for just character design, just to get it out there in a nice Instagram carousel, and like your fans
Yeah.
get so excited. So I love to see it expand beyond just cover art or picture books,
Yeah.
right? Because
Right.
even though there's this whole philosophy like I don't put my characters on the cover because I want people to be able to imagine them however they think they look
Right.
like, but then there's so much excitement when you see fan art,
Right.
right? Even
I
if you're
love
like,
saying that. Yes.
I'm a sucker for fan art.
Like, yeah, I couldn't imagine like if I, had written this book and people are doing art around it. I mean, just that's amazing. That
You've
really
made it.
is.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's the peak.
exactly.
Um, well, and I so appreciate this conversation. I want to ask you a very important question, which is, what do you want to be true 12 months from now?
I still want to be here, which sounds silly, but publishing is so hard. Even when it's hard, and sometimes I go, "Why am I still here again?" Oh yeah, I love it, and there's not, and I try to think of doing anything else. Um, I still want to be here doing the thing I love, and perhaps representing some more people. And what I love about what we do, and my colleagues in the industry across the board, they're really trying to bring in new voices, right? People who, especially underrepresented voices across, religion, race, all of that. That I would love these people to continue to feel emboldened to put out creative work, especially in the face of what's happening today with the book banning. I would say that's a critical thing. Like, I don't want people to be afraid to put their work out there. A lot of the stuff I've been selling is pretty subversive, and I'm not the only one doing that. So I just want that to continue to be true and to see even more of that.
I love that. That is such a good message. It's so timely. Um, I really, like I said, I really appreciate the work that you do, championing stories, sharing your knowledge. I'm gonna link in the show notes your where people can find you, your website, your agent course, and hopefully soon a financial
Yes,
coach
eventually,
or a
yes.
coaching course or something. So I'm really, really excited. I'm gonna keep my eye on what you're doing there. So thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. For more information on today's episode, please check out the show notes or go to writerunblockpodcast.com. Before we wrap up, if today's episode sparked ideas for your author career, don't let them sit in your head. Take action. If you are ready for high impact support, I offer one-on-one strategy sessions to help authors like you navigate your author business with precision. Head to reignitewithnicole.com to book a session or apply for any of my author programs. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a fellow writer and leave a review. Thanks for listening to Writer Unblocked, and I will see you next time.